If Foxconn continues to relocate, the unemployment rate will likely rise substantially, and the economy could further decline. I believe that anyone with a bit of sense wouldn't make such a foolish decision.
Foxconn can be described as Apple's preferred contractor, manufacturing a range of products including iPhones, computers, and iPads. Meanwhile, Foxconn has long been aligning with Apple's strategy of reducing dependency on China by setting up plants abroad. As a result, there have been continuous reports of a rapid decrease in the workforce in Foxconn's Jingzhou Park, leading to a downturn in the surrounding commercial areas. In cities like Shenzhen and Dongguan, where Foxconn also has manufacturing bases, recruitment and wages have reportedly seen significant reductions compared to previous years. The decoupling of Apple's supply chain from China is quietly accelerating. Recent reports indicate that for the iPhone 15 Pro Max released this September, components supplied from China constitute a mere 2%, a figure that has raised eyebrows. According to Japan's Economic Daily News, a smartphone teardown analysis by Formal Health Techno Solutions revealed that for the iPhone 15 series, components from the US, South Korea, and Japan lead the pack, accounting for over 70%. For the flagship iPhone 15 Pro Max, based on cost, US components make up about 33%, taking the top spot. Korean components come in second at approximately 29%. Japanese parts maintain a 10% share, ranking third, and Taiwan's component share has expanded to 9%. Chinese component supply, however, has shrunk to just 2%. Comparing the component distribution in iPhones over various series, the iPhone 12 series had a 4.7% Chinese component share. The iPhone 13 series was at 4.5%, the 14 series at 3.8%, and the 15 series dropped to 2%, showing a yearly decline. In contrast, US components increased annually, with the iPhone 13 series at 22.6%, the 14 series at 32.4%, and the 15 series at 33%. Simultaneously, the component cost for the iPhone 15 Pro Max has risen by 12% to $558, marking the second consecutive year of setting a new historical high. Earlier in September, repair website iFixit released a teardown analysis of the US version of the iPhone 15 Pro Max. The report highlighted that the phone uses ANAD flash memory from Japanese manufacturer Kioxia, a flash memory controller from Texas Instruments, and LPDDR5 SD RAM from South Korean SK Hynix, among others. The essential CMOS optical sensors for both front and rear cameras are exclusively supplied by Japan's Sony. In the power components section, companies like Apple, Qualcomm, and ST Microelectronics dominate power management chips, while Texas Instruments potentially supplies battery charging components, DC-DC converters, and screen power suppliers. Regarding other components, Bosch SensorTech provides a 6-axis accelerometer integrated with a gyroscope, and ST Microelectronics offers security components. The report mentioned that prisms might be mainly supplied by China's Zhejiang Lanta Optics, with Zhejiang Crystal Optoelectronic possibly being the second supplier. Previously, Chinese analysts had noted that Chinese manufacturers in the iPhone supply chain included key components such as packaging modules, rear glass, batteries, USBs, as well as elements like USB-C ports, acoustic parts, wireless charging, and assembly. For instance, in the camera lens sector, China's Sunny Optical is the supplier for the iPhone 15 series front camera module, and China's Largan Precision supplies camera lens components. The rear glass suppliers from China are Lens Technology and BL Crystal, while the battery providers are Desay Battery and Xinguangda Electronics. The acoustic components are supplied by Gortec. Given this, while the number of Chinese suppliers isn't small, Formal Health's analysis is based on cost, not quantity. This implies that Chinese suppliers occupy the lower end of the profit value chain. In an interview with Radio Free Asia, Qiu Yifang, an analyst from Taiwan's Economic Research Institute's Industrial and Economic Database, commented on Nikkei's assessment of component cost ratios. She pointed out, quote, major components such as the iPhone 15's chipsets, high-end lenses, and aluminum alloy casings are all supplied by Taiwanese manufacturers. These new spec components from Taiwan have relatively high unit prices, which has increased their proportion in the cost structure. Chiu believes that while the cost proportion of Chinese components hasn't changed much, the number of suppliers from China has grown. Apple aims to diversify its supplier base to effectively reduce costs. On the declining proportion of Chinese components in Apple phones, Chiu analyzed, quote, it's related to technological advancements. Apple selects suppliers based on quality requirements and tests. For high-end specs and related components which might require longer initial R&D, Apple would prefer collaborating with long-term trusted partners. Taiwanese companies still hold a competitive advantage in key components, while Chinese manufacturers are eagerly entering Apple's supply chain. Overall, the quote made in China component of Apple's devices has been decreasing year by year. Now Apple's primary involvement in China seems to be in the assembly phase. Regrettably, the proportion of iPhones assembled in China is also declining. Data shows that in 2022, 96% of iPhones were assembled in China, with the remaining 4% in India. In contrast, in 2020, India's assembly proportion was only 1.3%. Other reports predict that this year, India's assembly of iPhones will exceed 7%. Apple plans to shift 25% of its production to India by 2025. Positioning India to potentially replace China as the global production hub for Apple's supply chain. Over the decades of Apple's rise to become the world's largest tech company, it built an incredibly complex supply chain, with China playing a crucial role. However, with the intensifying US-China tech conflict and the ongoing economic decoupling, Apple, as a US company, is inevitably affected. This has led to a discrete, quote, de-Chinification of Apple's supply chain, which seems to have accelerated in recent years. This shift signifies that many Chinese enterprises which once prospered as Apple suppliers are gradually being phased out, raising concerns about their future prospects. For instance, mainland Chinese company BOA Technology Group, which had its OLED panels adopted by iPhone in 2020, became one of Apple's core suppliers. In the subsequent year, 2021, BOA's profits equaled the sum of the previous decade. Unfortunately, BOA's good fortune lasted less than 2 years. In 2022, they were reportedly ousted by Apple. Rumors suggest that BOA's exclusion was due to changes they made to the design standards of their OLED panels, which resulted in product quality not meeting Apple's standards, leading to a halt in supplies. This significantly impacted BOA's performance in 2022. According to their disclosed annual report, BOA's revenue for 2022 was 178.4 billion yuan, a decrease of 19.3% year-on-year, and net profit attributable to the parent company was 7.6 billion yuan, a steep drop of 70.9% from the previous year. Another exemplary case is that of OFILM, which began supplying lens modules and touchscreens to Apple in 2017. Financial reports reveal that while Apple contributed to 40% of OFILM's revenue, it accounted for 90% of its profit. In contrast, Chinese smartphone manufacturers provided 60% of OFILM's revenue but only 10% of its profit. In March 2021, Apple removed OFILM from its supply chain, leading to factory closures due to lack of orders. This was quickly followed by financial losses and a sharp decline in its stock price. In 2021, OFILM's revenue plummeted by 52.8%, resulting in a staggering loss of 2.6 billion yuan. Meanwhile, Wentai Technology, which took over OFILM's Apple production line in 2021, reported revenues of 52.7 billion, a 1.98% increase, and profits of 2.6 billion yuan, up 8%. Apple's largest assembly contractor, Foxconn, the company began investing in mainland China in 1988 and currently has over 40 parks in the region, employing millions at its peak. Just 2 years ago, 3 of the top 5 exporters in China belonged to Foxconn. This has made many local economies heavily reliant on Foxconn. For the iPhone segment alone, Foxconn produces 70% of iPhone products. In 2022, the company's revenue was approximately 1.49 trillion yuan, with 70% or about 1 trillion yuan coming from mainland China. Besides its impressive revenues, Foxconn has immensely contributed to China's economic development in terms of employment, taxes, foreign exchange earnings, and stimulating regional industrial clusters. Like other foreign companies, excessive reliance on mainland China has brought unforeseen risks to Foxconn. On October 22nd, it was reported that several Foxconn subsidiaries in China were subjected to sudden tax and land audits, sparking a tax storm. Analysts believe this move by the Chinese Communist Party, CCP, aims to influence Taiwan's upcoming presidential election, especially since Foxconn's founder, Terry Gou, announced his candidacy for the January 2024 Taiwan presidential election. His entry disrupted the CCP's favorite candidates, potentially leading to this tax probe as pressure for him to drop out. However, another interpretation emerged. A senior executive from a foreign tech firm who has worked in China for years suggests that the current economic downturn, coupled with financial crises from real estate firms and rising local debts, means the CCP is desperate for funds. After targeting domestic giants Alibaba and Tencent for tax issues, which concluded with significant fines, the CCP might now be looking to squeeze some funds from Foxconn. Taiwanese analyst Wu Jialong pointed out that while the CCP's apparent aim might be to influence Taiwan's elections, there might be deeper motives. Given the financial strain from central to local levels in China, and with Foxconn planning to shift its production and supply chain to India and Southeast Asia, this move could also serve as a warning. If the CCP can target domestic and foreign firms, Taiwanese businesses might be next in line. Further, Chinese President Xi Jinping has emphasized the importance of China keeping its economic destiny in its own hands, an approach often referred to as the quote, internal circulation strategy. This approach indicates a preference for China to voluntarily reduce its economic ties with foreign companies, including those from Taiwan, rather than being pushed into decoupling by external pressures. A key aspect of this strategy is to reduce China's economic dependence on the US and to counter the influence of overseas powers extending their reach into the country through businesses. There is also speculation that Beijing aims to replace Foxconn's dominance with mainland Chinese enterprises. This would mean that while Apple still relies on Chinese production lines, they would be controlled by Chinese companies rather than by Terry Gou or Taiwanese enterprises like Foxconn. Industry observers have noted that the manufacturing advantages of Taiwanese tech companies in China are gradually eroding. With government subsidies, Chinese domestic companies such as Luxshare and BYD are poised to offer more competitive pricing than their Taiwanese counterparts. They have already shown keen interest in taking over Apple's manufacturing contracts. This potentially offers Beijing an opportunity to gain more control over Foxconn. While the outcomes of recent tax investigations into Foxconn are pending, outside analysis suggests that Beijing's actions may accelerate Foxconn's departure from China. This could also serve as a warning to other foreign enterprises, especially Taiwanese businesses, potentially causing a chilling effect. However, targeting Foxconn appears to be in contrast with Beijing's main theme of attracting foreign investment. Amid the US-China trade war and the impacts of the pandemic, local governments in China have been trying to retain Taiwanese businesses to bolster their vulnerable economies. At the recent Belt and Road Initiative Summit, Xi even announced the removal of restrictions on foreign investments in the manufacturing sector, signaling a friendly gesture to foreign investors. However, the contradictions in policy reveal the uncertainties in China's current economic landscape. Wang Guochen, an assistant researcher at the China Economic Research Institute, commented on the unpredictability of China's economic policies. Quote, on one hand, they're inviting foreign investments, but on the other, they introduce policies such as the counter-espionage law and tax investigations into companies like Foxconn. A critical point to note is that this year marks a significant juncture for China in stabilizing its supply chains. Amid the rising US-China tensions, the, quote, China Plus One supply chain strategy has been gradually implemented. Leading Taiwanese tech manufacturers, including Foxconn, Quanta, Compal, Pegatron, and Inventec, have been making a, quote, quiet retreat from China over the past couple of years. Quote, the primary reason is client demands, revealed a general manager of Taiwanese company, which is an Apple supply chain. For instance, at Apple's request, Foxconn has been expanding its production capacity in India. Other major US brands like HP and Dell are also urging Taiwanese manufacturers to diversify their supply chains and shift some production to Southeast Asia. US brands are urging for production capacities to be shifted out of China, targeting not only Taiwanese enterprises but also Chinese manufacturers. For instance, Luxshare, Apple's second largest assembler for AirPods, has expanded its operations to northern Vietnam. Similarly, in March, Chinese acoustic giant Gore-Tex transferred its manufacturing capacity from Shandong to Vietnam. A management consultant familiar with Taiwan's tech supply chain commented, quote, a directive from American brands is clear. Move 40% of production out and retain 60% in China. Therefore, such a shift would have a profound impact on the Chinese economy. This presents a challenge for Beijing, which has been emphasizing, quote, economic security lately. Yet, if Foxconn were to depart, the looming question is, where would its over 1 million Chinese workers go? Recent events have sparked anxiety among many Foxconn employees.
富士康被查之后啊，吃瓜群众是爽了。
After the investigation into Foxconn, the public might find it amusing, but what about the ensuing unemployment for the millions of workers? Many were hoping for stock market rescue news, but instead they got news of Foxconn's probe. Currently, Foxconn employs around 1.2 to 2 million people in China. If you consider their suppliers, logistics, and other associated businesses, the total could easily reach 3 million. While it's commendable to handle issues with Foxconn lawfully, the ramifications, like the ensuing unemployment of millions, need foresight. You can't expect these workers to suddenly become food delivery riders or couriers, and who's ordering so much takeout now anyway? Despite Apple's gradual supply chain shift out of China, Tim Cook, Apple's CEO, mentioned in an interview during his visit to China on October 18th that over 95% of Apple's products are still manufactured and assembled in China. Jiang Yaqi, the chair of Taiwan's Association of Law and Technology and a professor at the National Taiwan Ocean University's Law and Politics College, noted in an interview with Radio Free Asia that due to the tensions of the US-China tech and trade wars in recent years, major tech firms have been making certain preparations. Jiang stated, quote, it might not be a complete decoupling from China yet, but there's a clear effort to mitigate risks. Initially, the idea of shifting such a massive supply chain out of China seemed daunting. But as years have gone by, we can see the changes in the data. Jiang pointed out that while it's not feasible to sever ties with the Chinese supply chain all at once, there's a noticeable and gradual decoupling. Quote, decoupling and diversifying risks is an ongoing process. Moving facilities isn't an overnight task, but major tech firms are persistently working on it. There may still be some supply chain factories and collaborating manufacturers in China, but their proportion has been steadily decreasing.